black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
I think in trying to understand some of this is to understand, go back to who we are as a people. And you've done extensive research on this and a true believer in ancient Kemet and that sort of thing. Tell us what that really means and help us to embrace that, because I think in doing that, going back to who we were helps us understand who we are.
Absolutely. Well, I believe, and this is not unique to black people by any means. All human beings place themselves in the context of where they have come from. And therefore, you can't finish a course in American history unless you place it in the context of European history. And if you pick up a chemistry book or a biology book or a math book or an English book or even a philosophy book, it begins in Greece. It begins to talk about the greatness that preceded European people. People talk about their greatness that preceded their current way because that lays a context for who they are. One of the things that happened with us with slavery is that we think of our foundation as having begun in slavery. And we lost the connection with the great civilizations of ancient Africa that Africans built. And I mean, even now, there are lots of distortions. Not we, but even the scholars will argue that ancient African civilization was built by invaders. Now, there's a pyramid in Africa. There are obelisks in Africa. There's Sphinx in Kemet, if you will. I mean, that somehow these people who came in and found these things built by Africans, they've been adopted and claimed by other people as belonging to them because it authenticates, it gives a context for their genius and their possibility.
And it keeps from giving African Americans credit
Absolutely.
for having had the intelligence and the know-how to even
be able
do
to
it.
do that. Exactly. So the only way you can become a doctor is to become somebody like Hippocrates, not understanding that Imhotep, who was a black, bald-headed man who taught the ancient Greek physicians about medicine hundreds of years before there was any kind of practice of medicine. The same man who designed the step pyramid of Saqqara, who Imhotep, was also a brilliant physician. The Hippocratic Oath was based upon a papyrus that was written thousands of years before Hippocrates began to lay out his oath of healing that was written by a black man. These were black Africans. And even the way it's talked about, the fact that Egypt, even today, is called the Middle East, as opposed to Egypt is on the continent of Africa. Mm-hmm. And the beginning of Egypt came from the the basis of Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the center of Africa, and the Nile flows upward to the part that is known as Cairo and Alexandria. So the beginning of Africa is down in the part of Africa near the Sudan, down in the part of Africa where people look just like me. But by not knowing that, by not understanding that, and again, I like to emphasize, because people say, oh, you're just kind of distorting this so you can make yourself better than anyone. It's not about that. It's about understanding that we represent a continuity of greatness. And once you do that, then our young girls and boys can understand they can achieve today as we once achieved before.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Emoji Circle. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you saw the first part, I started like I did this show with a small video clip of a great scholar that I follow who focuses on the psychology of our people and the traumas and dealing with the traumas and how to heal us as a people, Dr. Naeem Akbar, and I hope what you heard him say, and he's saying what I tried to show in the first episode of this two-part series, and this is part 2 of this two-part series. And I want to continue from about where I left off. And for those of you who are new to this show, my name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and the purpose of the Emoji Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts when we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And as you can see, the title of this show is the psychological effect of 246 years of enslavement and another 100 years of Jim Crow apartheid that we as people of African descent here in America are still dealing with. You got to understand, even though the point of an action like enslavement or whipping or whatever trauma that was done to us collectively, not a bunch of individuals, it was a collective trauma to millions of people, okay, that I started talking about, though that does not just end at that time. It reverberates down the generation. Dr. Akbar said, and like I said in the first show, we all carry the mind of those who came before us. So whatever trauma that was established by people of African descent in the 1800s or the 1700s, guess what? Their children saw the result of that trauma. Okay, Dr. Akbar wants you to understand that. Dr. Joy DeGruy, who I talked about in a little bit on this show, the last one, who came up with this 6-year study that she said, post-traumatic slave syndrome, said there were certain types, and this is where I ended the last show on, there's certain type of survival patterns that were established in order to survive the horrors of enslavement, the traumas of enslavement. There's certain ways of thinking. You have to have that dual consciousness when you're around master, and you gotta have this consciousness amongst each other. And you would deliberately force not to study, even though you descend from people who built pyramids, who built civilizations, who owned government, who ran empires. But when we crossed that ocean in those slave ships and were put into those, camps, we use the euphemism of plantation. No, they were no different than those camps that held Jewish people. The horror that was done to them. 246 years of non-compensated work, whippings, rapings, okay? This is what we have to face in America, all right? So I started out last time with certain thoughts to generate this conversation, and I'm gonna continue on part 2. Let's start with these points I want to bring to you, to start a conversation. And you should have these conversations on your at your dinner table or amongst friends or on your couch or in study groups or wherever y'all come together. Have these conversations and heal yourself, okay? Race in America has always shaped America's concept of culture, democracy, economics, and citizenship. You must understand that. Race in America is everywhere. It's part of the American psyche. I know we're told otherwise, that this is America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. No, this has been a racist society and a slave society for most of its existence. And Black Americans have been for hundreds of years confined by deliberate types of laws, along with social and economic policies, to separate zones of living, not being allowed to go where you choose as true citizens who are protected under the law. That's on paper, we have these laws, 13, 14, 15 amendments, but in practical application, we had segregation after those Reconstruction laws happened. right? We couldn't, our towns were burnt down. We were attacked by the Ku Klux Klan was formed to keep us from going anywhere. When we went to certain cities, when we had these evacuation from the South, and we went to northern cities, we found neighborhoods where we could not move into. Is that America? Is this that land of the free? Trauma continued. Let's go on. Whenever you look and see disparities in our societies, like you see today, whether they are economic disparities, economic wealth and housing disparities, cultural disparities, or disparities in criminal justice systems, remember this maxim: there is no accident, only precedent. Okay, these things are not accidentally happening. Okay, black people are not accidentally going to jail in droves, even though we're 12 to 13% of the population, but we're almost over 50% of the people in jail. You know, we're having economic disparities in home. We're having health disparities. You think it's an accident? No, these are deliberate. And they're the precedent. If you don't understand what happened in the past, you'll never understand the present. In other words, there is no accident in shaping a society, only events that precede that which each of us witness with our own eyes. We see it every day. We see the disparities, okay? And if you think that history is not important psychologically, when you go to a psychiatrist, like you would go to and talk to Dr. Akbar or Dr. DeGroote, and talk to them, what would the first thing any psychiatrist or psychologist would do? They would go into your past, would you not? Okay, your personal history. When you go to a bank to get a loan, what do you think will happen? They'll ask for your financial history. If you go anywhere, if you go to a doctor to deal with a problem that's happening in the present moment of physical ailment, before they touch you, they deal with your health history. If you don't understand that, like Malcolm said, of all our studies, history is best prepared to reward our research. That's what he means, because the present moment is in the soil of history. It grows out of that. History is the light that shines on the present moment. So without historical knowledge, and many of you really don't understand our history and the trauma of the history, yet you want to understand what's going on in the present moment. That's impossible. All you're going to get done is get manipulated by those who will tell you what you think you need to hear, not what accurately needs to happen. History needs to understand. You need to understand the precedent, what happened before, to understand how we got to this moment in the present moment. Let's go on to the next one. The social, economic, and cultural, racial disparities we still witness today did not come about by accident, like I said earlier. They are the result of purposeful decisions in the past. Slave codes, right, that separated blacks from whites. The fact that there was people who are called whites. There was no whites before the 1600s. They were French, they were Spanish, they were English, and they fought amongst themselves for hundreds of years in Europe. They only started becoming white in the presence of enslaved people, okay? And most of those whites who came over from Europe in the 1600s and 1700s were not the wealthy. They were the dredge of England, of France, of Spain, okay, looking for better. But slavery was the economic foundation of this country. And black people and Native Americans were the first ones to be made commercial, okay? If we know about past events, then we can move forward with informed intentions and purposeful goals and plans to make the correction necessary for this system to work for those they currently don't work fully for. In other words, you can't make a plan for the future if you don't understand the past and how it functions today or do not function today. What was the intention of the people in the past who set this thing in motion? and you experience the results of their decisions in the past. You know, why is it still not working for black people? Why are we still having problems getting jobs? Why there are glass ceilings? You know, even though we got people in corporate America that look like me, they still go to a certain level and stop. Why is that? Okay, let's go on to the next one. To better understand black America's chances to succeed in the 21st century, we must draw lessons from our history here in America and ask what factors produce the conditions the majority of African Americans find themselves in today. After 400 years here in America as people of African descent, we are like a shattered diamond. Though the scattered pieces might be strong, we still in the process of putting these pieces together. We are not fully whole, brothers and sisters. You must understand that when that ship dropped those 20 or so Africans on the shores of Virginia, you know, Point Comfort, not too far from Jamestown, Virginia, in 1619, those people, again, were not named Keith like me or John or Frank, okay? They had African names. They had African cultural nuances. They spoke different languages, okay? They were, and others like them, were broken off from their lineage of thousands of years of history, of understanding, of great empires, and brought here and were condemned for hundreds of years to be subservient to another group who arbitrarily called themselves white, okay? And those scattered pieces, or the diaspora as is also known, were spread throughout the Caribbean. We are all descendant of those people, okay? We call ourselves a Jamaican. We call ourselves a Black American. We call ourselves from Guyana. We call ourselves from all these Haiti. No, we're Africans, and that's where those diamond chips were sent. And the fact that we're still here as doctors and lawyers and all teachers and all these other professions, you must understand those people who were dropped off in 1619 were not here to be any of that. We're still doing that today. So don't become complacent. That's my point. The fact that we're here is amazing to me after reading the history of our people here and the trauma that we have to deal with. Let's go on to the next one. Say, slavery and Jim Crow segregation didn't begin because of any kind of miscommunication. Oops. These were systems designed to exploit one group of people, black people, to the benefit of another group of people who called themselves white, to delineate themselves from those they abused and traumatized in the land of the free. You see the contradiction? Don't want to face that, America, but this is the truth. Let's go on. There's an American myth that we all hear, that we tell ourselves as Americans and the rest of the world, that for the past 250 years, since the beginning of America, America stood as a beacon for all liberty-seeking and oppressed people everywhere. Okay, let's go on. That's definitely a myth. But then there is us who contradict it, the African-American citizens of this country, who contradicts that myth. Of people who have been here even before there was an America, okay? Whose mere historical fingerprint is like the 500-pound elephant in the room, whose mere existence gives that evidence to a lie. Every time we exist, every time we talk, you know, when we talk as if we are these Americans, we say founding fathers. Who's founding fathers? George Washington, who owned over 300 of people that look like me? Thomas Jefferson, who owned over 240-something people, and also owned the young lady that he had a relationship with, who was a teenager, okay, who had no right to say no, Sally Hemings, who had multiple children by that grown 36 or almost 40-year-old man, who was the half-sister of his dead wife. And that's who we want to lift up as the pillar of the best of America. See, that's the history they don't want to speak about. But we must talk about that trauma, both to the black people, and in order to justify your reality, white America, you are traumatized too, okay? Because you lived in fear of slave revolts. You lived in fear of the people you knew were human beings. But you had to deal with that reality too. Let's go on to the next one. In other words, how do you deal with the fact that this nation was literally built on the backs of enslaved, oppressed, and non-free people? For example, the American myth expounds about the freedom of the Constitution. The Constitution gives everyone. But the black historical reality shows that the constitutional rights were denied us for the first 76 years after the Constitution, which was ratified in 1789, and the 13th Amendment that was ratified and passed in 1865. Okay, so how do you justify that, talking about the Founding Fathers? They told us when, from what I've learned, that we were just 3/5 of a human being. We weren't even a human being, okay? Supreme Court Judge Taney said in 1857 that we have no rights as America because we are property, okay? So no white person should give us any kind of rights. And this is a Supreme Court judge. You think the Supreme Court today is a problem? We've dealt with Supreme Court as black people for hundreds of years who did not have our best interests at heart. So this is nothing new, okay? Let's go on to the next one. And since the end of the Civil War, where according to the Smiths, we people of African descent were made citizens with the passing of not the 114th, but typo, but the 14th Amendment. But instead of a true freedom, an entire framework of social systems were erected to enforce a new system of American apartheid, based on what the Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney, this is what I'm talking about, said loud and clear in 1857 that black man has no right that the white man needs to respect. And that idea still exists to this day. There's a whole portion of a majority who don't respect the rights that we, by law, as a citizen, we were dealing with since 1868. Still don't. We had to wait another 100 years until 1968 and 1965 and 1964, 100 years again, but we had to deal with an apartheid system, okay? Didn't respect, we had no rights, okay? Still burned down our towns like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, all right? Or Okasee in Florida. All these, every time we tried to live the American dream, we were devastated by white rage. But yet, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we're supposed to not understand why Brother Kaepernick knelt when the national anthem was played. Because most people don't recognize that the Francis Scott Key was a racist. At his third stanza, when you sing the national anthem, vilified black people, and that was the black who fought with the British in the War of 1812 and who participated in attacking Francis Scott Key, who was one of the militia who was swept aside by the British on their way to Washington. And we all know what happened in Washington. It was burnt, okay? And he was upset, and he wrote the third stanza because he saw black men, how dare they, with guns, okay? We still have a problem with that to this day. So I understand, as a black man who knows his history, Kaepernick's reason for studying. If you don't understand that, well then, there's books out there that'll teach you. Let's go on. This framework of a racist social system, not an American freedom, lasted for another 100 years. This is from 1865 till the Civil Rights Movement. And why was there a Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s? When these laws were put together in the 1860s? Come on, America. And who's remnant in the form of systematic racism which exists to this very day, okay? They form, and these are what's left over. The structure of enslavement was brought down in 1865, and the fingerprints of slavery was nullified in 1964. But the stench of racism of those two institutions still exists to this very day. Okay? This new system of apartheid, called euphemistically Jim Crow segregation, forced generation after generation of black Americans into a form of quasi-slavery and allowed my black ancestors to be stripped of their rights, added American rights at America once again. Now, I'm gonna go with one more and then we'll shut this down. Blacks were barred from moving to some states, remaining in certain towns after sundown, from living in certain streets, neighborhoods. This is all what we had to deal with for, the 100 years after enslavement, and all that traumatized us, okay? Trauma still exists. That's what Dr. Naeem Akbar in the video in part 1 last show and part 2 this show is talking about. And there's certain type of behavioral patterns that we develop to survive that we need to get rid of and deal with as a people to this very day. I'm gonna stop right here. So until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye. Gianna, Vi, and sisters.